Hi, I'm Arthur, and in the history of 40k, there is a long-standing discussion that permeates pretty much every aspect of the fanbase. Hell, pretty much every fanbase that is mostly a masculine demographic is usually gonna have this situation where all comes to blows from the mention of this question, and it can exist from anything from Bleach all the way to something like Death Note, and sometimes you just gotta ask yourself, hey yo, who do you think would win in a fight, Base Goku or Tien if he had 10 years of training in the hyperbolic time chamber and also a shotgun? The question of who is stronger is one that permeates most fan bases, and I am here to give you a breakdown of everything you need to know about each of the factions, their strengths, their weaknesses, and why they are the way they are. This is literally just a ranking video, of which I'm going to be discussing each faction in 40k, or at least the major playable ones, and then break them down into sort of a top 13, top 12 type beat, from weakest to the strongest, at least in my opinion, giving my reasoning for each. Now, when I say weakest or strongest, I am literally just talking in terms of something simple, where if you take the faction and take its entire force and put it man for man against another faction, who would win, allowing them to use whatever they're best at to their advantage. Now, I should note that this is my opinion, but it is done with research and kind of in a good-spirited jest sort of way. You know, make some enemies, make some friends type of deal, you know? I'm not gonna mince words too much. You know the premise, though before I do get into it, I do want to make an honorable mention. I said it's kind of a 12-13 type list. There's a reason for that, because honorable mention for someone who is not on the list, but I have no idea where to put them, and that's the Ynnari, who in theory could be powerful if they even existed. I talked to my local Eldar expert to see if they were powerful at all, and his response was basically to say they got hoed so bad that they have never really been mentioned since, and that is very disconcerting. I think they are cool. The reason they are an honorable mention with no real ranking is they do have some neato tricks involving bringing the dead back to life, but that didn't stop them from getting shit-stomped by a single keeper of secrets, which sucks. And also, it doesn't stop them from losing most of their battles in like the half of an essay they got in terms of writing. But in general, there is a good base concept there, but we know literally nothing outside of seeing them get rocked, so yeah. You know the drill at this point. Subscribe if you like the content, like if you liked the video, comment how much you hate me for putting Genestealer Cults where I did, and let's fucking do this! Number 12, the Genestealer Cults. Coming in at last place is the Genestealer Cults, and I don't think I'd have to argue as to why. The Genestealer Cults, I thought about including in the Tyranid roster, but they are kind of their own thing, sort of, with their own different weapons and different mechanics separate from the Tyranids. So outside of sharing Genestealers and Broodlords, it's not exactly the same faction from a war perspective, but yeah. The Genestealer Cults are last place as they are kind of easy to deal with in a 40k sense if you know about them. Like, the biggest weakness is being discovered before they are ready, and it takes them decades to be ready. It takes one dude doing his job and not getting the whoopsie stabbo from the Patriarch for an entire army to be sent in to exterminate them, and usually they can exterminate them and the planet survives afterwards. For even further context, there is a reason why in Space Hulk you only really need about 5 dudes in Terminator armor to deal with an entire Space Hulk full of Genestealers and Genestealer Cults, because they really aren't that strong and are literally only around to be the intergalactic equivalent of fast food for the Tyranids. Though, with that all being said, they are still a threat to most other factions, at least on the small scale, as because they are relatively weak, they have to play into their specialties, which is hit and run, guerrilla tactics type beat. They ambush and plan ahead so far that it's actually pretty difficult to stop a Genestealer uprising once it's been pulled off successfully, unless you include something like Space Marines or Sisters of Battle or something. And even then, it's still really difficult to stop. Like, a good example is what happened to the homeworld of the Scythes of the Emperor, where they were actually pretty much decimated by the Genestealer uprising that led to their home planet of Sotha being eventually destroyed, which was kind of an important planet, if you remember the Horus Heresy. But regardless, they are more of a tool than a faction, but they are still a decent threat. But when the main literary device used to push this faction as being dangerous is the fact that infestations were a game mechanic about 20 to 30 years ago, they're not exactly as much of a threat as you'd think on a case-by-case basis, right? Number 11, the Daemons of Chaos. Okay, this one is going to be a bit weird, and I know I lost a lot of you by saying this, but follow me, as it's a ranking that I have to give an asterisk. I separate Demons of Chaos and Mortals of Chaos, as demons on their own tend to just do their own shit, the same with Chaos Cultists. One empowers the other, but one exists because the other exists. It's kind of weird like that. So why the low rating? It's because without mortal followers, the Demons of Chaos are only a threat to anybody who's kind of close to the Eye of Terror, which I guess is now the Cicatrix Maledictum, so I guess they're a bit more of a threat going around the universe where the minor warp rifts are slowly opening up. But regardless, they also tend to rip each other apart and keep each other in check. Like Nurgle demons tend to fight Tzeentch demons, and Khorne demons tend to fight Slaanesh demons, so they kind of keep each other in balance because of the great game. They have to bicker and fight a lot because they hate their rivals more so than they hate anybody else. But that isn't just it. See, the asterisk is that when demons appear en masse, they are one of, if not the most dangerous threat in the universe, as they can kind of appear infinitely, and you can't really destroy them. Like, say if you have the possibility to summon infinite demons with no limitation on respawn rates, Chaos is the strongest faction in the universe, but fortunately, they can't. And because they can't, it means that they're bound to certain limitations that make them a pretty weak faction, as all you would need to know is the certain rituals to deal with them. There are several different specialized factions who are really good at dealing with them, and due to this high level of restriction they face, it's kind of kept them at bay and leaves them as kind of the C+ in terms of faction strength. Plus, both the Necron and the Tyranids have ways of dealing with them, with High Fleet Cronus being able to deal with them from a distance, and with the Shadow and the Warp being stronger with them, it tends to just make them despawn, I guess, if they get too close. And with the Necron, they just have the ability that if they could stop bickering like children for long enough, they could actually probably close the Cicatrix Maledictum, but it's never going to happen because they're too busy bickering about old man yaoi things to get anything done. Hell, the Imperium has both blanks and the Grey Knights, which are hyper-specialized units to deal with psychic phenomena and demon-based threats, which, for the blanks alone, like the Sisters of Silence, they're 70% immune to the majority of the tricks that demons have, and are used to deal with demons pretty exclusively. But yeah, in theory, due to all demons being mostly immortal, they could be the biggest threat in the universe, but think of them as a really cool sword, completely useless without someone actually able to use them properly. Number 10, the Tau Empire. Yeah, for those who know the lore well enough, putting the Tau here probably is not that shocking, as they are kind of held back being an intergalactic threat for like 2 or 3 reasons. For one, they don't really have warp travel, which means that they can't really expand outside of their spherical motions that they're doing right now, kind of engulfing these small spheres, which also means they just don't cover a lot of ground as a whole. That also ties into the second main issue, and that is that for an army with an actually rather large range of miniatures to choose from, the Tau are comparatively a goddamn small threat on a cosmic scale. There just aren't enough of them, which holds them back a lot. Even including the different Tau auxiliaries, they are still pretty small. The second major issue, but I guess you could say it's kind of a minor one, is that the Tau lack true psychers. Though the Empire itself has psychers with middling level of psychic abilities in terms of the auxiliaries, there are no true Tau with true psychic abilities that come up. And there are some problems that happen with that, like the naivety they have about the warp, chaos, demons, the corruption that comes from it, and so on, causes them to be put into some pretty harsh situations when it comes to relying on other species that can be corrupted. With all that being said, if those weaknesses were removed, Tau would probably be an easy top 3, definitely not number 1, but the Tau, as they are, have some of the best tech in the universe, with a bunch of experimental battle suits with different weapons that are constantly being improved. Just look at the Supremacy armor and see the Supremacy armor railgun and just tell me that that's not a big threat. That being said, do they have the best tech in the universe? No, not by far, but in terms of weaponry and various other advancements, as well as the different auxiliaries they can call in on a war front, they actually can be a pretty decent fight to anybody who fights them in a straight-up ground battle. Hell, there is lore that actually suggests at some point soon they might be losing their immunity to chaos, as Commander Fireside almost fell to Khorne, which would have been fucking cool, but whatever, man. Number 9. Craftworld Eldar. Before you get your pitchforks and torches, hear me out, as I have much to say to justify my... Okay, for real, I'm just putting most Eldar lower on this because 25% of my reasoning is I just hate them, and the remaining 75% is that I think they are lame and kind of weak as a faction, but they do have their strengths. I think, unfortunately, in terms of universal strength, the regular Craftworld Eldar are the weakest of the main three. They are still pretty powerful, don't get it twisted. There's a reason why Space Marines do feel a little nervous around them. But, okay, so the main problem for an Eldar, especially a Craftworld Eldar, is a death of a Craftworld Eldar, or even a shattering of a Spirit Stone, is significantly worse than the death of a Space Marine or a human. Because reproduction for Eldar does take a long ass time, and in order for them to reach a level of skill, well, once you kill a 1,000-year-old Eldar, it's not like you create those all the time, right? So it does take time for them to catch up with that level of skill. It's why if you blow up a craft world, it's more akin to destroying an entire solar system worth of people and information rather than just destroying a planet like you would think. I think the biggest one outside of that is their hubris, though. That's their biggest weakness. Eldar have a tendency to get a little too into their big speeches about how they're superior to you, which usually ends with them getting smashed by a 60 IQ guardsman with a single frag grenade and a really good idea. Shout out to that one time that Jane Zara, one of the greatest Eldar warriors, got tricked by a half-dead Night Lord into getting blown up because she wouldn't just finish him off. Fucking whoa, crack grenades be upon thee. But as far as physical might goes, the Eldar are kind of up there. In a straight-up melee brawl, if you were to scale everything down to their size, like say you took a Space Marine and you made them roughly the same dimensions as an Eldar, Eldar would win every time. Their level of training and skill is almost unmatched. The only people who could possibly meet them would probably be a Necron that was like fully sentient and had all of their memories. But other than that, there isn't anything that can match their level of learned skill, because Eldar spend most of their lives, if they're choosing the path of the warrior, to that, being a warrior, to fighting the good fight, and because of that, they are actually uncomfortably good at most forms of warfare. Unfortunately, when you've got about 900 pounds of solid man meat coming at you like a freight train, wearing about 3 tons of solid steel and fantasy metals, with a gun that seems to be a dedicated war crime weapon per each person, yeah, I think the fact that they wear eggshell thin magic armor doesn't really do much to the fact that they're now a smear on the ground, but what do I know? They can dodge bullets, which is kind of crazy, but you know. Number 8, the Drukhari. Legit, I had no idea where was a good spot to put the Drukhari, but I gotta say this again with a bit of an asterisk, the same way that I gotta put an asterisk on Chaos Demons. I gotta compare and contrast with the Craftworld Eldar as well, and outside of the few times that you see inside the Kamara, they don't really get to do many cool things or even present much of a threat. I'm not kidding, think of what could be the biggest threat to the universe, and Drukhari are weirdly enough low on the list. They're probably below Orks if I'm being honest. And they're... I know people kind of gas them up a bit to be the biggest secret threat in the universe with all their horrible ancient tech, but like, if it was all big and bad, why is it that on raids they can still get their assholes pushed in by like a singular Space Marine? And yes, I mean a singular Space Marine. In the book The Brothers of the Snake, a single recent inductee of the Iron Snakes chapter of Space Marines was sent to deal with an invasion of Dark Eldar who had crash landed on a planet. See, they were fleeing from a massive wall of Orks in order to seed a level of war because they were carrying an ancient orc relic. This single battle brother that was deployed there, albeit equipped with a land speeder, heavy bolter, regular bolt gun, power lance, power sword, and a boarding shield, he was pretty decked up, was able to take on well over multiple dozens of Dark Eldar in a straight up fight with quite a great deal of ease. These were Kabbalite warriors, I should mind you, but regardless, a single Space Marine being able to take on at least well over 30 Dark Eldar while on a Dark Eldar ship, and also having to protect a secretary lady who had followed him into the ship, that does not bode well for how physically strong your individual guys are. Now, you could come to me and talk about, what about Pepulus Pinor, the greatest Dark Eldar Archon that ever lived, the guy with an axe that could split through dimensions, but I'm like, well, yeah, but I'm not comparing individual Dark Eldar, because with that being said, I could look back at like the greatest of demons and be like, oh, look at Scarbrand. Scarbrand's one of the greatest threats in human history, and if I put him up against pretty much any other entity in the setting, he'd win 9 times out of 10 unless it was another demon or there was some bullshittery afoot. So I'm talking about the generalistic principles of each faction, and yes, going to Kamara, they have significantly better technology than most other factions in the universe, but for some reason, and I'll get into why once the video gets towards its end, they never use it. They only use it when it'd be funny or when the plot demands it, but it can never be used, and that's because it would destabilize the setting for the most part. But I will say the home field advantage of Kamara is actually one of the bigger ones in the entire setting. Like, there is a side dimension in Kamara where shadow entities exist that we don't fully understand, and you can enter into contracts with them to have them just kill people. Literally just drag them off to the shadow dimension to never be seen again, and you don't even gotta play a game of Yu-Gi-Oh with them. God, did I just make a fucking Shadow Realm reference in the year 2024? God, I'm getting old. Regardless, the level of technology that they have is also very interesting, but it's also based around not so much being lethal as it is being cruel. See, they're normally equipped with splinter pistols and splinter rifles, splinters being the term here to describe the crystalline, solidified, poison, acid, whatever shards that they load into these weapons. Think of it as a modified version of a shuriken pistol that does the same thing, but it's not poisoned. This poison is meant to inflict as much pain as humanly possible and lock you up, either to kill you or to freeze you so that they can take you back to Kamara to torture you, because torture is kind of the thing that they do. I think that this leads to a great deal of boundless creativity, but it also can lead to a bunch of openings and weaknesses where, because they don't have the ability to just off, like shoot you and you die, it can lead them open to a lot of weaknesses. And with that being said, they still have all of the major benefits of the Craftworld Eldar, although not nearly as psychically strong, I think. Actually, now that I think about it, do Dark Eldar have I'm not getting into that right now. But regardless, I think that they're really a strong faction. I think they're gassed up too goddamn much, but I think that they're not nearly as strong as people think they are. Just read any book where they're the antagonist to see how hard they get fucked up against a wall by some random no-named space marine. Or they just win immediately because of some cheaty bullshit designed by Vect. But yeah, Vect is kind of a thing. I'll talk about him at some point, but who's that? Oh, hi, hello. This is just kind of a brief intermission. Just wanted to say hi as well as, pay my bills. But before we get into that, I just want to say, you enjoyed the video? I know it's kind of a contentious point in the 40k fan base to say one faction is stronger than another, but I should also note, I'm not saying that factions are better than other factions, as if so, Leagues of Votann would be #1. But regardless, I'm using my own biases here, and I just kind of want to know what you guys think. Do you guys have a particular ranking that you think? Take the 13 or so options that I have, make your own ranking in the comments. I kind of want to see what other people would think and what people would agree with. I think a lot of people are going to put Necron at #1, but we'll get there. So I just want to see what you guys think. But as I mentioned, I have bills to pay. So I've got something kind of funny to share with you today. My channel has been sponsored by Gamer Subs for a little while now, as you probably know. I genuinely like the drink mixes, and fun fact, I think they are the only sponsor that I myself reached out to before they even considered communicating with me, because I genuinely just wanted to promote them and get free products. But I'm not going to be promoting Gamer Subs today. I'm going to be promoting Gamer Soups. No, I'm not kidding. Gamer Subs has a line of ramen noodles that I kept asking to try out, and now that they have sent me some, I gotta say, the sample they sent, it's really good. As someone who was in university and had to string together $15 a week to survive off of whatever food I could get, making ramen taste not bad is kind of my specialty. But this, I didn't really have to do anything, just water it and you're good. I've been trying the chicken flavor and it's not half bad. Dare I say, it's actually pretty good. It's even got a little spice to it, which weirdly enough, you never expect. And before you ask, yes, code BONEZONE even works on the Gamer Soups for 10% off the price if you grab some. And they're about the same price as just regular kind of higher end cup noodles, so why not pick some up? Which of course is my recommendation. And if you do so, let me know what you think of the beef flavor if you get it. I haven't gotten that one and I kind of want to use you guys as my test pilot to see if they're any good. So yeah, use code BONEZONE for 10% off. Then let's get back to the video. Number 7. The Leagues of Votann. With all my biases being what they are, you should be goddamn surprised I left this low. But yeah, the Leagues of Votann are a pretty powerful faction. The only major issue, well, one amongst many, is we know goddamn near nothing about them. As of this recording, there currently is no books with them as the central focus, as the High Call's Oath isn't out yet. But regardless of what we know about the Leagues, we do know one thing, and that is that they probably have the highest level of technology available in the known universe outside of like the Dark Eldar and the Necron, with technology that surprisingly can eat suns, as well as ships that can consume lesser Tyranid bioships for resources. Their biggest weakness is the fact that all of their technology is very practical, which might be a weird thing to say, but all of their technology is made to fulfill a purpose, and that purpose is to be done as efficiently as possible and as safely as possible, with any loss of resources being mitigated. So what does that mean? Cartridgeless ammunition, short-range bursts that are meant to be able to deal with things in tight confined spaces, as Leagues of Votann, the kin themselves, tend to work in mines and confined spaces a lot. That leads to them having, say, better bolt guns, which are the OTOC pattern bolters, that fire more shots consistently than your standard bolt rifle for like a regular Space Marine, but they have a lower functioning range than them, meaning, you know, they're a couple yards shorter on the functional range. It leads to their military tactics being a bit too safe, and that's a bit of a weird complaint to have, but it can cause them to be caught in traps for people who are willing to risk more just to get them and win the war. That doesn't mean that there aren't any brazen and very masterful strategists amongst their ranks. There's Uther the Destined, who's known to outsmart Chaos on the regular, okay, that's it. But regardless, I think they're cool. I think they're a really fun faction. Okay, I'm putting these guys in the 8th spot because of brand loyalty and the fact that they legit have some of the best weapons in the series, but we literally do not know how combat effective they are in any war footing, as there's only like maybe one war that we know about, which is the Battle of Orkvire, where they ended up outsmarting 2 Chaos warbands, of one of the World Eaters and the other being the Purge of all things. They usually stick to the Galactic Core, which kind of makes the Galactic Core kind of a mini Kamara, as if you pick a fight with kin in the core, you will be swarmed by a cavalcade of short-bearded men and women with axes and stubby bolt rifles. So, do with that what you will. I love them. They have greater tech than the Mechanicus, as it's all pre the end of the Dark Age of technology, but, you know, their shit is a bit, undercooked. I'm literally just glazing. Number 6. The Harlequins. Speaking of glazing, I'm gonna say this and try not to sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, but the Harlequins are probably the strongest Eldar sub-faction you can play, as they have a pretty high win rate in the lore, if I remember correctly. We are kind of at a point where there aren't really any negatives for each faction. There's just a bunch of different reasons for why they would lose in an all-out offense. Before I go into it, I think that the Harlequins are only just behind the next in line by a very thin margin. The only reason why the Harlequins are number 6 instead of number 5 is they fall into the camp of, yeah, sure, the appearances we have shown that they're pretty strong, but there are so many inconsistencies with the scaling of how strong they are that we just can't really pin them to where it is. Like, the Solitaire in lore is supposed to be on par with destructive power like that of a Primarch, but in game, the Solitaire has 3 wounds, which is less than like any Space Marine character. I think there are Terminators that are non-characters that have that amount of wounds, which is wild. Regardless, I think that there is a case to be made that they are the strongest of the Knife Ears, as for one, they have a living god on their side, who, by the way, Kegarak, is just the funniest little guy in the universe. But the Harlequins have probably the best hit-and-run tactics in the setting, able to weave in and out of the webway with a level of ease that you can't normally see in anyone, while hitting shit with some of the most dangerous and fanciful weapons out there. See, the Harlequins have access to weapons that are kind of on the opposite end of practicality that the Drukhari have, where the Drukhari have weapons that are meant to cause pain in as efficient a way as possible. The Harlequins have weapons that are meant to kill you or inflict a wound so bad that it can't be fixed at all. Like, case in point, the Harlequin's Kiss, a needle gauntlet thing that stabs you and injects feet upon feet of microfilament razor wire that whip all throughout your insides, turning your insides to the consistency of Wendy's chili, which, although impractical because you have to punch dagger that shit in, you can't really treat that kind of a, you can't treat a guy's wounds once he's become toothpaste, right? So yeah, a lot of their weapons are kind of like that, really dangerous in a graceful way, and honestly I kind of dig the aesthetic. And from an elf hater, that should mean something. But feel free to bitch and moan in the comments about how I got it wrong and the Pangorius blast launcher D cannon could rip holes in the warp. I don't care. Though, if you were someone to say shit about me being a little elf hater, then you're not gonna like who's next. Number 5, the Mortals of Chaos. This one is self-explanatory, but it's also not at the same time. So why are Mortals of Chaos so high and Demons so low? One simple word: ingenuity. See, a Khorne demon, although a separate consciousness from Khorne, still thinks identically to that of what Khorne would think like, with very little variation. But with humans and the cults that worship the gods, they have their own ideas that a god could not figure out, which might seem a little bit weird, but it's true. There's a reason why the Chaos gods love turning mortals into demon princes instead of turning them into full-on demons by absorbing their souls. That is because if you give them a little bit of free will, they can enact upon plans that a normal chaos demon would not be able to. And with that in mind, the things that humans can do with this demon magic and the forces of chaos is limited quite literally only by the bounds of their own creativity, which for some legions of Space Marines should be a bit more limited. I'm reminded of a quote: "Hell is other people." With that in mind, a lot of people that worship chaos tend to take things from hell and put them into tanks, which is, yeah, that's not cool, and that's also incredibly dangerous on the battlefield because demon engines are a very dangerous weapon. And alongside that, chaos cults tend to be more insidious and easily infestable than any Genestealer cult, as they don't really have to hide much other than maybe a single tattoo. But let's not even look at the humans for a second. Let's look at the Chaos Space Marines, shall we? They're probably the best threat to Space Marines of the Loyalist side on an individual basis than any other threat in the universe. Sure, a Carnifex versus a Space Marine could easily rip it in half, but a Chaos Space Marine knows the exact weaknesses of a Space Marine and how to exploit them because they are one. It's shown that word bearers in lore are the worst chapter for other Space Marines to go against, as they usually play against the weaknesses of Marines pretty well. And what are the weaknesses of a Space Marine? Getting clogged up by bodies that don't care about how physically strong you are, as you are just slashing and cutting, and they just don't stop coming because they are not afraid of death. So they send a bunch of zealots after Space Marines, and while they're distracted trying to keep these guys from getting into their soft seals, a single word bearer with a force lance, a power sword, or what have you just runs them through, and it's one of the most useful strategies that a word bearer has. I will say that the biggest limitation that Mortals of Chaos have is that they're not going to be as big as the Imperium. I mean, genuinely ask yourself, do you think that there are more people who defected to Chaos than there are not? So they're always going to be outnumbered by quite a lot. Their numbers are always kind of on that side of the underdog. Sure, they have some pretty dangerous powers at their side, but alongside that, their biggest strength is, weirdly enough, desperation. A man who has nothing else to lose and everything to gain is one of the most dangerous men in existence, which is pretty much every Chaos guy out there. Tech-wise, you have people working with the Dark Mechanicum, which is basically the Mechanicus' edgier brother with no restraints, who do stuff so dark that, canonically, the only video I have ever had been demonetized that I could not argue, even though I messaged YouTube directly, was a video discussing one thing that the Dark Mechanicum did, and if you know, you know. The Chaos Marines have demon-corrupted tech as well that make it unstable and more liable to hurt them and the people that are around them, but also, it shoots fire bullets now that fill you with evil demon fire, which is kind of cool. There's Terminator armor that fuses with their bodies, making them faster and quicker and more evil. The gifts from Chaos are just plentiful and in mass abundance. They may not be the most advanced in terms of tech, but they sure have the most explosively volatile and violent tech. And when it comes down to it, that's pretty much all you need in a straight-up war. Number 4. The Orks. I know I just pissed off a few people, but Orks are probably one of the strongest forces in the universe if we discuss outright strength, but in terms of tactics, skill, and brain power, they are literally the bottom of the heap. The Orks are literally the Nepo baby of 40k, where all of their abilities to kill and murder shit is based around their genetics alone. It doesn't take much for an Ork to be as strong, if not stronger, than a Space Marine, and also they grow in the millions, which is a problem if you couldn't figure that out. Orks lack the tactics of every other race, as well as the brain power, which kind of keeps them in check most of the time. Even though they have the brain power of a syphilitic gibbon, they still have some of the weirdly best tech in the setting, though not necessarily the most functional. Again, their genetic code leads them to have an instinctual level of understanding when it comes to technology. They literally don't know what they're doing, they just do. Something in their blood makes them weld pieces of tech together. It's why there is this kind of misunderstanding that if an Ork believes something to be true, then it becomes true. That is unfortunately not how it is, as it's just actually Orks don't even know how their tech works, it's just that genetically they know how to put pieces of tech together and so on and so forth, which I think is fair. So, with all that out of the way, without mincing words, what is the biggest strength of the Orks? They are brute force made manifest into a species. I mean, they are physically the strongest race in the universe, able to overpower most anything through bulk or sheer numbers. And that's kind of what they rely on, as even though their tech is rudimentary in some areas and advanced in others, it's still useful. It's why there are entire divisions in most chapters dedicated to having Ork specialists, as if you don't know someone who knows how to deal with Orks, they can get out of hand pretty quickly. Just ask the Crimson Fists what happened to Rin's world. Regardless, Orks have probably some of the biggest and most dangerous characters in the setting, like Ghazghkull Thraka, who is actually above Primarch tier in terms of strength. Since we are in the top 4 now, there is actually a precedent for most of these where most of the factions have almost wiped out the Imperium at some point, and the Orks are not the exception to this, as they themselves have come close on numerous times to killing incredibly significant characters. The Orks are held back by the fact that they are genuinely programmed to bicker with each other more than anyone else, as all they want is just a good fight. So, because of that, it's hard for them to ever band together in one massive grouping for any long period of time without something big at the head to guide them. If ever they decided to band together, the universe is kind of fucked. But it doesn't mean they can't plan. Massive wars stretched across the universe have happened before. So don't think that just because they are in the number 4 spot doesn't mean that they're not one of the strongest races in the entire setting. Because if you underestimate an orc, that's the quickest way to get murdered by an orc. Number 3, the Tyranids. Okay, this one is going to be a bit controversial as well. The top 3 could be arranged in any order, and you'd have a good argument for all of them. With that in mind, I have my reason for the Tyranids being number 3 as the biggest threat in the universe. And that is that, 1, I honestly don't think that there is some massive Tyranid fleet coming out from the outside of the Milky Way. I know the Silent King came back after millions of years to help, but bro, it took him millions of years to find out that Tyranids were there, so there couldn't have been that many that close for it to have mattered that much. I think people who think that the Tyranids are going to win the entire setting are coping because they want the bugs to win. Now, does that mean they're not a threat? No. Though that kind of goes to the second reasoning as to why I think that they're not the biggest threat to the universe or the biggest threat on the playing field. And that is that people have found ways to hard counter Tyranids. See, the Tyranids' main specialty in terms of combat is the hard counter. No matter what you do, if you fight Tyranids for long enough, you will run out of tricks as they keep adapting to whatever you do if you do it long enough. But sometimes there are a lot of factions who have figured out that in order to kill a Tyranid, you need to cut off its head immediately. You can't give them time to adapt, and if you can master that kind of lightning strike, then you can repel a Tyranid invasion, now at a great cost to your own life, but it happens, they can do that. But Tyranids are just one of the biggest threats in the universe for a reason. They have the biggest guns that have no tech involved whatsoever, just natural grown farm-fed muscle. They get stronger with every planet they consume as they consume the biomass from each planet. And alongside that, they steal the greatest weapons that other races have created biologically, with some species coming from just other species. What do I mean with that kind of confusing sentence? Well, the Zoanthrope and the Neurothrope came about because they started to consume Eldar more frequently. And there's a theory that the Tyrant Guard and the Hive Guard were created from Space Marine genetics. God help them if they get a custodian. But I do want to point out the fact that there is one last issue with the Tyranids, and the thing that kind of keeps them from being the most dangerous threat is the fact that they have no ambition. There is no anger or hate, or at least there's very scant amount in a way that most people can understand. See, with Tyranids it is just hunger. If you are fighting Tyranids, you are fighting a swarm of locusts, you're fighting a tornado, you're fighting a force of nature that can only be endured and then sometimes fought back, which kind of makes them a perfect example of the bronze medal. They don't have the ambition to push for more than what they actually want. They just keep doing what they keep doing, and they're pretty predictable in that way, which means that there is ways to kind of circumvent that. And there are some pretty goofy ways that people have dealt with Tyranid invasions. Shout out to when Uriel Ventress with a bunch of other Death Watch members broke into the interior of the head ship on a Tyranid fleet and shot a Norn queen with a pistol that was originally from a Hrud, and that pistol had a syringe filled with a super evogenic whatever goo that caused a psychic signal to be sent out from the Tyranid Norn queen to every other Tyranid that caused them to start over-mutating and over-evolving until they just died horribly. Yeah, that was so goddamn stupid, but it works, and it is canon, so there are ways to deal with Tyranids even if they are kind of stupid. But yeah, let's go to my number 2 position and then, start some fights, I guess. Number 2, the Necron. Yeah, I know some of you are screaming at me because by implication you already know who the number 1 is, but let's discuss the Necron, okay? The Necron are one of those factions that are only held back by a few things, and one of the major ones is that they just haven't all been awoken yet. And the ones that are awakened have semi-permanent brain damage. There are a bunch of reasons as to why the Necron are so powerful. Objectively, the best tech in the setting, very massive amounts of numbers, and also they just have some impossible to reach planets filled with tombs with trillions upon trillions of these things. They did get rid of most of their most powerful weapons, though, which is kind of a hindrance to them. They are still so powerful that in a straight-up fight, they can win pretty much most times. They're actually probably rocking a higher win rate than the Tyranids at this point. They use Gauss weapons most of the times for their normal shock troops, things that can dissolve the bonds between particles with a single shot. Old tech so archaic and weird that you legit would probably have no idea how to use it if you picked it up, and a lot of it can only be used if it's hooked up to a Necron body. Another example as to why they're so archaic and hard to fight is because, well, their species tends to flaunt the fact that they don't breathe and have normal vital functions, so all of their motions and tech can do things that would normally kill a human. Like, for one, their vehicles can stop and start on a dime because they have no organs or blood that would shift due to the fact that they would stop and start so fast. Also, the interior of most of their vehicles and habitation things don't have oxygen and are mostly just pure void because, I mean, they don't need to breathe, they don't need to worry about temperatures, and they don't really need to worry about anything else, so it makes boarding actions from other species significantly more difficult as well. So, with all that in mind, they are a massive threat, which is why they're in the number 2 spot. With some of the most dangerous characters in the setting, people with the ability to slow time, freeze time, interfere with the space-time continuum, and let's not forget they have pieces of gods chained up to be used as both weapons and power sources for their stronger weapons, with bodies made of living metal that 9 times out of 10 can regenerate from pretty much any damage, and even further than that can regenerate even further and gain more abilities with the right command protocols. These individuals operate on sort of a pseudo-hive mind, being able to be controlled by the higher ranking nobles with command protocols. And all of that being said, with all that in mind, why the fuck are they the number 2 spot instead of number 1? And that's because of one simple fact: longevity. I know it might seem like I'm pulling that out of my ass and don't know what I'm talking about, but it is true. Sure, the Necrons have survived millions and millions of years and have kingdoms that would basically never die, but that is kind of changing in the most recent iteration of their lore. It's kind of their biggest weakness. Let's kind of break down what I mean. So more so than the Eldar, when they lose a single Necron, and I mean a Necron that cannot be regenerated, there is no way for them to replace it. Necron can't reproduce at all. They are not living things, and therefore have to construct new creatures to kind of serve alongside them, but these aren't Necron. They're canoptic creatures. These constructs are semi-sentient machines that need to be piloted by Necron and given command protocols in order to do more or less anything. They're automated machines. And yeah, 9 times out of 10, when a Necron is destroyed, they come back, but 1 time out of 10, they don't, and they can be permanently destroyed. There's a reason why it's such a big deal when there's a Necron invasion, because every time a Necron fleet invades, they lose people that they cannot replace. Normally, it's just troops, sometimes it's immortals, and sometimes it's higher-ranking guard members, and at worst, it can actually be nobility. One of my favorite examples is that there is a virus that is currently claiming the Necron. No, not the Flayer virus. The Novak dynasty is fucked. They went up against a specific Death Guard plague vectorum that has a virus that affects only metal, and it affects the Necron and is slowly killing members of their species. The Novak dynasty, I don't think we've gotten much of a recent update on them, but they are being slowly erased because of the Ferric Blight. And even after that, you have the Flayer virus, which I mentioned earlier, which makes Necrons slowly lose their sense of self and become a feral ghoul. They can't plan, have tactics, or be reasoned with, and simply wish to steal meat from living creatures. Hell, sometimes when they awaken Necron nobility, with their wealth of knowledge, they can sometimes be fried due to the eons of being frozen in stasis, leaving them little more than a gibbering husk similar to that of a Necron warrior. They don't have their minds, and thus all of that information is lost. Sure, they do have the best tech, but once it's been scrapped and they can't recover it, they're not getting it back, and it's very hard to find materials to make new stuff. Sure, Blackstone exists, but it's a finite resource, and losing a Necron Lord, well, that's impossible to replace. Sure, with all the interdynastic bickering and conflicts that occur leading to losses in their own ranks, even with someone like Imhotep or the Silent King kind of leading everybody together, there are losing numbers, and it may not seem like it's significant now, but there is no gain. They might be able to gain space, and they might be able to have tech that wins them a lot of battles, but they will never be able to gain numbers back unless they reverse biotransference and make new Necron tier babies. But then they have a bunch of other issues, like they're mortal now. Sure, they can just wait out most of their problems, but waiting always has certain issues with it. They have 1 million planets and trillions, if not quadrillions, of Necron on each planet, but that's the thing. That is all they have. They will never get more. Even with Eldar, they can make more Eldar over time, and they can still gain skills, but with Necron, all they have now is all they will ever have, and it's not like the demon conundrum, where if you kill a demon, well, the demon just respawns and reforms further back in the warp and can come back later. No, if you kill a Necron, they are not coming back, and you will never get someone to replace them. If they did not have that, and they could create new Necron, they would be the strongest faction in the universe. They would not have that obsolescence issue where individual compartments become obsolete over time just because they lose their knowledge, their information. Nobles become obsolete as they just lose their mind to a virus of some sort. But that is why they are number 2. So, who is number 1? Fuck you. I know you're mauling right now. I do not care. The Imperium stands eternal, baby. Milky Way sweep. Nah, this isn't even a meme. The Imperium of Mankind is number 1 in the universe for a goddamn reason. Yeah, there are races that have better warriors than us. There are species that have better tech than us. Hell, there are civilizations that have better everything than us on a superficial level. But you know what we have? The indomitable power of the goddamn human spirit. The stars aren't theirs. They are ours. We have malice. We have hate. We are the only documented species in the lore right now that has a desire so strong that we will willingly sacrifice ourselves for the cause. What's that? 1,000-year-old Chaos Space Marine? You're a venerated member of some ancient war band and boosted up by the dark gods above normal Space Marines, and you're almost about to become a demon priest? Well, that kinda sucks, because a 14-year-old meth-addicted Elysian drop trooper with a primed melter grenade is about to punch you in the face with it. Oh, I'm sorry, Tau artillery unit with the most rapidly advancing technology in the universe at the moment, obliterated an entire Kriegsman unit to a single man. Oh, you wanted to interrogate him to find out where his base is at. Unfortunately, with his dying breath, he ordered a mortar team about 500 kilometers away to deliver about 300 megatons of explosive go fuck yourself directly on his position. We will sacrifice whatever it takes to win. We have the strongest and most powerful weapon in the grim darkness of the 41st millennia, and by fucking God, that is spite. We will kill anyone on our team as long as it means you don't win. We will win this fight because fuck you. That is all we need to push past any technological or spiritual advantage that you have. There are entire groups of Inquisitors who will firebomb an entire planet just to bully a Tyranid fleet to be slightly weaker so that they can beat them later. Trillions of lives means nothing to us just because we can win one fight. We have pure brute force on our side, and in a way that Orks could never understand, because where they have pure rage and bloodlust, we have pure, unadulterated, concentrated fucking hate. Think of us like a gorilla in the woods that feels vengeance. Sure, Necrons might be smarter, and they might be the humans in this kind of analogy, and they have better tech and rifles, but honestly, would you fist fight a gorilla? And would you risk getting close, especially one that hates you, holds vengeance in his heart, and wants to throw a big fucking rock at you? Yeah, I didn't think so. Oh, I'm sorry, you have shields that are powered by expensive electro-techno whatevers? Well, we have guys who've replaced their genitals with Tesla coils who are ready to fry your shields as well as explode themselves in the process. Yeah, Giant Mech will make whatever abominations they can to win whatever war they want. And if we need to make a bigger Titan to fight whatever fucking Tau battlesuit they come up with, by God, we will. With our final breaths, a curse upon the universe, we are not afraid of the alien, the mutant, the heretic, because we will become the thing that they fear. We will become the monster that they hide from. Their shame, their doubt, their unending guilt at all they have done up to this point. We will be that and more, because we are humanity, goddammit, and the stars aren't theirs to conquer, they're ours. Praise the Emperor, boys, and pass the ammunition, because it's soon time for us to head into the trenches. Okay, I had to catch my breath on that one for a second there. But, like, I hope that was at least entertaining. I'm literally getting this done at the 11th hour right before I have to get started to get packed for my trip. Because I am going on a trip to a different country to go visit a friend. I know, I kind of put this off at the last minute, but I'm not known for being the most organized. I know it is a bit contentious, but this is kind of just my opinion. I know it's a cop-out, but realistically, in a fictional universe of any kind, the most powerful faction is whoever the author wants it to be for whatever book they're writing. Can an Ultramarine beat the shit out of a Necron Catan shard in one-on-one combat? I mean, according to the Uriel Ventress series, yeah. Can Orc and the Diviner go back in time and castrate your dad before you were ever born, just to prove a point? Also, probably, yeah, but it depends on the book. I think a better explanation as to power scaling is how George R.R. Martin discusses who is the best swordsman in A Song of Ice and Fire, that massive series. There's this massive list of the greatest swordsmen that ever lived, but at the top is an individual by the name of Sir Arthur Dane. And Sir Arthur Dane is dead before the first book in the series, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how strong you are and how good of a fighter you are. There are so many other circumstances that are just apart from strength that trying to figure out who is just the best in raw strength is such an idiotic thing. The premise itself is kind of dumb. I think that people getting upset over power scaling is just, it's silly, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. The story is whatever the story is. Whoever is writing and whoever the protagonist of the setting is, that's whoever the strongest is. Because plot armor exists. I mean, Abaddon versus Marneus Calgar, who wins? I don't know, whoever's writing the story, and if we need to kill one to progress it, then I guess that's who is stronger at that moment, right? Being the best in a conventional status means literally nothing. It all just depends on the battlefield and a bunch of different things involved in fighting. It's why I side with humanity, because they kind of have that X factor of propaganda and hate. But what do you all think? Do you think this entire long-ass video is just Imperial propaganda? Or do you think I'm just a little idiot for not ascribing to the groupthink that Necrons and Tyranids are the best faction? Let me know in the comments. I might even argue with a few of you. Special thanks to my channel members for supporting me. Because with your help, I'm able to make these videos and be able to take a trip, a break every now and then. This is kind of my celebratory lap for hitting 100,000 subs, because I've been putting in the work for quite some time now, and I think it's time for me to actually go off and do something. You've legit changed my life with your generosity and with your help. But if you want to support me and continue to see these videos put up, as well as gain access to additional and early content, then become a channel member today. Thanks once again for watching, and nah, I'm not memeing. I genuinely do believe the Imperium is the strongest faction in the universe. Fuck you.